Hello everyone, this is Stephanie Rose 88 and I'm making this video because I want to talk about the discussions that have been going on about mental illness in the media because of the really tragic Newtown shootings where 20 children were killed by someone who we suspect suffered from a mental illness. Um, Anytime that some major tragedy like this happens, um, I'm always expecting this to happen because the media loves to portray mentally ill people as psychotic, homicidal maniacs who are just waiting to murder, everyone that they can come in contact with. They ignore the fact that, the vast majority of people with mental illness will never hurt anyone and are not violent in any way. And, having a mental illness does not mean that you're going to be violent. They're not connected. One does not mean the other. Yet in the media, people are led to believe that mental illness equals violence. Recently, the CEO of the NRA made some really despicable comments about people with mental illness. His solution for violence, for trying to prevent violent tragedies from happening, is to have a database, a national database of mentally ill people, so we can keep track of everyone. And he thinks that this is what's going to prevent violent things from happening. He also used, a lot of offensive words like lunatics and monsters running the streets to describe people with mental illness. It was just really horrible. And so, I was talking about this with some friends and family, and how horrible it is that he would use language like that to describe people with mental illness, and also that he has this idea that that's the that's the problem. People with mental illness is the problem, instead of recognizing that people with mental illness are no more likely really to hurt anyone than anyone else. That being unemployed is a greater indicator of committing a violent act than having a mental illness, statistically speaking. Having a divorce in the previous year is a greater you have a greater statistical probability of committing a violent act than you do with having a mental illness. Particularly schizophrenia and other types of psychosis are singled out as something that would make you a violent. Meanwhile, most people with schizophrenia are never going to hurt anyone in their lives. So this is a big myth that is perpetrated, and it's really in the spotlight every time that someone does something horrible, and it was horrible what happened. But the answer isn't to stigmatize and people with mental illness and cause even more fear surrounding people with mental illness. Now, this article I wanted to discuss is Here Comes the Crazies. That's the title of this article. The title itself is just so horribly offensive. That would be like me writing an article saying, you know, let the retards out onto the streets, or some other offensive thing to describe someone with an intellectual handicap. I mean, here comes the crazies. It's pretty bad. And it gets worse. I'll just read a little bit of it to you. It says, here's some scary news. The Cuomo administration is preparing to shove thousands of mentally ill New Yorkers out of supervised settings. This is what we call, the most restrictive settings. Okay, they're trying to move people from very restrictive settings that they no longer need to be in into lesser restrictive settings that they can still function in and be a part of the community like they deserve to be. Where they're saying they can be forced to take their medication in these restrictive settings into far less restrictive, far more dangerous community housing. So they're saying that community housing is very dangerous, which is not true at all. This despite two recent cases of people being fatally shoved from subway platforms, both allegedly by crazy people. Again, referring to people with mental illness as crazy is offensive. It just shows, the amount of respect that this person has and compassion that this person has who wrote this. And again, yes, that's a horrible thing, but violent crimes are committed every single day. The vast majority of them are not committed by people who have mental illness. We just can't prevent everything from happening. There's always going to be violence in this world, unfortunately. Yes, it's tragic. Yes, it's sad, but we can't blame it on mental illness. Instead, they will be placed in community housing without full-time supervision. People with mental illness don't always need to be supervised all the time. The goal is to, be in the least restrictive setting is what we call it. You know, there's no reason to go to the ICU for, a stubbed toe. And if you have a mental illness but you're functioning well, you don't need to be in a maximum security hospital. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, this is part of the state's plan to essentially empty adult homes into community-based supportive apartments, leaving up to 6,000 people, including those with schizophrenia, to live on their own with minimal supervision. So there we go, pointing out schizophrenia. Like, we should be horrified that people with schizophrenia could live in our communities. No, it's terrible. People with disabilities should have access to community-based services, accessible housing, with appropriate supports and employment opportunities, says Cuomo in an executive order in November. Wow, what a novel idea. People with disabilities should have an opportunity to be employed and to be a part of their communities and to live on their own independently. Gee, that sounds so horrible and dangerous. It's ridiculous. Okay. But as Pat Weebdale, whose daughter Kendra was shoved to her death in 1999 by a schizophrenic who'd stopped taking his meds, has warned, it would just be like deinstitutionalization, the same as putting people on the street. It's not the same as people putting people on the street, number one. Number two, yes, it's horrible that her daughter Kendra was killed by someone who was happened to be schizophrenic. She could have been killed by any, someone without mental illness. People are killed every day by all kinds of people with or without mental illness. Her daughter was the reason behind Kendra's Law in New York City, which can force people in outpatient programs to take medication. This is another issue that I'm going to discuss in a separate video, medication. Everyone talks, this is the third time that forced medication has been mentioned in this article, as if that's like the pinnacle of good treatment, and it's really not. But I'm going to have to discuss that in another video. Medications have actually caused some people to commit violent acts. But again, another video. Okay, I don't want to read the whole article to you, but it says how the Obama administration is kind of pushing this along because they say that it's illegal to segregate the mentally ill, and it should be. Why can we shouldn't segregate an entire population of people just because of a disability that they have. That should, come as common sense to people, but this is horrifying to the writer that we don't want to segregate an entire group of people for no reason. But he thinks that if you have mental illness that you're violent and that you should be in an institution and that you should be forcibly medicated and that you're a danger to the community, that you can't possibly be a person who could benefit your community, or I'm sitting here with my baby, and I'm a mother of two, I'm a wife, I'm a compassionate person, I'm a member of my church, a member of my community, and I've never hurt anyone in my entire life, nor do I want to. But I have been hospitalized. I was on medication. I was in treatment for years. I'm not anymore, and I'm doing much, much better. I've been in recovery for, well, since 2010, January 2010. Um, and and a lot of people are like me. There's many people that you can't know just by looking at someone if they've struggled or continue to struggle with a mental illness. There's millions of people with all kinds of mental illnesses, and we come from all walks of life. And it's really horrible. It makes my heart just sink when I see something like this. Here comes the crazies. It's horrible, and it's not beneficial to anyone. It's not beneficial to people with mental illness, and it's not going to help, prevent any violent atrocities from occurring. It's going to actually probably make it worse, because if you force people into situations where, they're stigmatized by everyone around them, they're treated badly, they're in an institution that is, overfilled and not helping them where they don't need to be, you think that that's going to help people recover and prevent violent atrocities? I don't think so. Okay. And they just go into he says over and over how dangerous mentally ill people are. As Assemblyman Philip Goldberger warns, my biggest fear is that they rush into something in the name of helping people, the mentally ill, and ultimately hurt them. And this writer says, not to mention endangering the general public. So really, this is just an article based on fear, based on ignorance, that has no factual basis to it whatsoever. And it's so sad to me that this could even be published. That a publisher, that the New York Post would actually say, oh yeah, we can publish something called Here Comes the Crazies, that is terribly offensive to millions of people in American society and their families and their friends. That's fine, sure, publish that, no problem. That shows me that there is a substantial amount of people in our country who agree with what this man wrote. And that's scary. That's really scary to me. So I really want to encourage people, if you're in recovery, if you've struggled with mental illness, or you have a family member or friends who have, speak out, speak up more about it. I know it's embarrassing. I know it's hard because you are stigmatized because of articles like this. If you come out and say, I have schizophrenia or my son has schizophrenia, people are going to be like, oh my gosh, don't kill me. And that doesn't make it easy for people to come out. But you should, because, the more that you do, the more that people realize that, hey, you're just a person and I don't have to be afraid of you. And the more that they'll realize that people with mental illness are not people to be afraid of. So I'm sure we'll hear more of this as the media continues to play on this horrible shooting that occurred. And I just wish that we could have a more constructive, compassionate, understanding discussion about mental illness. And you never hear from the mentally ill themselves. It's always either people like this who hate them and don't know anything about it, or organizations like NAMI, which they do some good things, but it's the families of people with mental illness. It's not the people themselves, and we're the ones who can say what's helpful and what's not. And our experience and our voice matters the most, in my opinion. So that's it.